Right, good morning and welcome to today's webinar from the UKAA. Just waiting for people, well, letting people join us, but I might as well kick off because it's 10 o'clock. Today's session is brought to you by a new organisation, Optim, joined together of two really interesting people, Brendan Geraghty from Geraghty Taylor and James Fenner from Silk Road Marketing, and we're also joined by Helen King from Touchstone. And we're going to pick up on the topic of what the impact COVID will have on the way we learn to live in the future. What lessons have we learned? What are the things that need to happen? What things are going to change? As ever, we do have the Q&A function. We'll be picking up questions during the course of the event, and I'll be asking them at the end. But if you've got anything that you need urgently asking, then do shout out or do put it there. There's also the chat function for those of you who want to talk to each other or talk to us or talk to me. Anyway, thank you for joining. And just to remind you, this is being recorded and it will be available on the UKAA website probably tomorrow. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Brendan, I think, who's going to do the introductions and talk a little bit about Optim and what it's trying to achieve. So Brendan, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everybody, and very pleased to be here. I'm Brendan Geraghty from Geraghty Taylor. We're architects and interior designers that have been active in the build-to-rent space for many years now. And part of our focus has always been looking at the customer experience, and understanding more about that and what that might be, because we believe the build-to-rent sector really, differently to all other parts of residential real estate, has the customer at its core. And a few years back, I met James Fenner, and who's equally concerned with consumer dynamics, customer requirements, and we started to forge an alliance that has resulted in the creation of Optim, which is looking at consumer trends, consumer requirements, and feeding that into the built-to-rent brief, so that ultimately, as an architect, I can create a better product, but also we can have a much better informed brief and positioning for those in the built-to-rent sector to meet their customers, to meet their client requirements. So a little bit about us. Helen.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Helen Kings. I'm the managing director of a company called Touchstone. So we're one of the largest residential property management companies in the UK. We manage about 16,000 homes, which span across every UK postcode, and really going through every stage of life. So we have students in our properties, through to young professionals, families, and then further on into retirement stages. So I think we're pretty well positioned to understand what those residents want, and I guess really the practical impacts that COVID have had and the way we've needed to change the way we operate.
I'm James Fenner. I've got a marketing consultancy I've had for about 6-7 years, focuses primarily on property, albeit I've only been involved for about 8 years. We do everything from branding and marketing through to customer intelligence and trend forecasting. And it was, outside of build to rent, I was quite surprised when I started working in property, because it felt like no asset class actually put the customer, whether it be a business, retailer, or the consumer in residential property at the heart of it, which to me was quite alien. So everything we do, it's very much about the customer centricity. And then now with Optim, it's actually making sure it feeds through to the design, and then therefore when it gets to sales or rents, of that product, it's going to be a lot easier to do it, because hopefully it's be more appealing to people. It's interesting. I spend a lot of time working in the car industry, and we would do research. When you stress test a product, it's when you get the real insights from a product. So I worked a lot of time on Audi, and we would go around racetracks with professional drivers, and it was pretty scary, where they would be stress testing what it was like being in this car. Similarly, we'd go out with older people when it was raining, it was dark, to see how they would react in the car. It's just a way you can understand your product. So for me, being interested in consumer insight and research, I mean, the lockdown wasn't a great thing for me, but I did it from a business point of view. I thought it was really interesting, because actually it gave us an opportunity, when people have stress tested their houses like never before, what it's going to be like. And, it's quite interesting when you read stuff out, and there's obviously a lot of stuff out there at the moment about this. But, what's coming through is that we are now an urban species. We're spending more time than ever in our homes. But actually, for a lot of people, those homes aren't relevant. They're not appropriate. The more time we spend in it, we realise there are more issues with what we've been designing in the past. And this is something which is not going away. Well, I'll just take you through a bit of background in terms of we've done our own bit of research, and we'll take you through the background, but then more importantly, we'll go into the the main insights which have come from that research. It was just under 500 people respondents. We did this, I think, Brendan, it was 6 weeks into lockdown. So people were kind of getting used to it. They weren't getting bored of it yet. It was still a bit of novelty in there, I'd probably suggest, but, people were, especially the working from home was quite difficult. Majority of people we spoke to was in that sort of 30 to 59-year-old category. There's sort of 70% of people were there. The living situation, 50%, probably very similar to what the national is, 50% of people just under were, partners or families with children at home. And we had 30% that were partners. And then as you can see, the others, the different ones going down. Number of people in the household, again, representing that, sort of 3s and 4s were the biggest number with 5. So families, but still the one, still there were single households we're speaking to. Type of home people were living into, we did have quite a lot more of the sort of, in terrace, semis and detached housing, because there were quite a few people that we spoke to were in the country as well, which a lot of those will be detached housing. And we did split apartments up, between studios 1 and 2s and also 3-bed apartments. And this just means if anyone after this wants to get more information, let's say, okay, those living in a studio apartment or 1-bed apartment, what were their views on something? Just let us know. It's just a way so we could break down the data later on. And where do they live in? We had sort of 70% of people living in the city centres and suburbs, and 25% living in the countries and villages. So this was just interesting for us, because what we wanted to know was the way that people felt about working from home, being in their homes in countries versus town centres, same in terms of house sizes, which we'll get into. In terms of the working situation, pre-lockdown and post-lockdown, sort of during lockdown, pre-lockdown at the top, so 10% or 11% of people we spoke to weren't working. So the rest, no surprises there, that 50% work from home all the time, 22% of people work from home occasionally, and only 13% work from home all the time. And that obviously flipped during lockdown to just under 70% working from home. And then those that aren't working, split between working from home occasionally or working away from home, obviously the type of services they were doing. So, no surprises, we had a big switch. Available outdoor space, obviously this has been I'll touch on this later, but a lot of research we do is outdoor space is always very, very important to people. And we did have, 72% of people did have a garden. That did include, by the way, the graphic is probably a bit misleading, people that had a garden space within an apartment building. 10% a balcony, 10% of people had no outdoor space we spoke to. There was 5% a rooftop terrace and 3% a patio. So it's quite limiting there from an apartment perspective. So that's kind of the background, gives you a view of the type of people we spoke to, the type of living situation environments they're in. Now I just want to talk about, which is probably the insights, where the insights start coming out, actually what was it like for these people? So the first thing was, what's it like working from home? And these are split. So at the bottom, you've got those that live in an apartment and those that live in a house. So, 50% of people living in a house going, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, it's great, adequate space. Whereas, no surprisingly, when you talk about apartments, it's only a quarter of the people. So 26% of people are going, actually, this is okay. And people say, you've got in apartments there, you've got 35% of people, it's impacting the way they're working. But even with space to work disruptions low, it's still not great for people. And we've got a client, this big recruitment company, for example, and they did a survey out to all their staff globally, just at the start of lockdown, and 67% of people said, we're fine working from home, it's not a problem. Within about beginning of June, that was down to 2%, because these people are under 30, they work in a sales environment, it's sociable, they want to get back in the office. Then again, similar, no surprises, because the more rural you are, the more space you generally have, and therefore the easier it is. And even, a lot of people actually rurally have faster internet connections, or those us living in the towns as well. So yet again, we saw this problem that the more in a city you are, the more chance actually that coping working from home can be stressful. This is interesting for us, because then it was, okay, if you think about the way you're living at the moment, what are the key elements? We didn't say during lockdown, but during this period, what are the key elements which are really important to you? Not surprisingly, dedicated workspace. I'd probably put an S on that, because a lot of people, it's, when we're designing homes, we think, there's the home office. But actually, a lot of families now, it's 2 people are working. So how do 2 of you work? Who gets the office, who gets the kitchen table, especially if the kids are Zooming as well on the dining room table, however it is. So that dedicated workspaces, has come up as being very important to people. And that is something which I cannot see that changing in moving forward. More outdoor space. This is not surprising because this is when we're only allowed out for an hour a day. This has probably gone back a bit, but people will always want, some more outdoor space. Space to exercise, we'll get onto this separately. Exercising the home there's been a slow trend, but this is massively accelerated during lockdown. But what I find interesting, normally said to people, they say, oh, I want more space generally is what they want. But what's happening now is people are thinking about what I want to use that space for, which is quite a change. It's, oh yeah, I prefer to have a bigger house or a bigger apartment. But actually, I want a space to do this. So it's actually thinking about key elements. And not surprisingly, what we touch on the faster internet as well is that, fiber optic into the apartment rather into the building or into the street, and people are now, because all of a sudden this has been massively stress tested for people. You've got 3, 20 somethings sharing an apartment, all Zooming at the same time, and things are dropping out. It's not good enough anymore. We said to people, actually, when this all finishes, post-lockdown, although actually now we're not allowed to go in the office, we're going to work from home anyway, but we didn't know at the time. We said, what do you all feel about working from home? And, okay for a day or 2 a week, or happy, I've enjoyed working from home, is higher for those living in a house, which is not surprisingly. But it generally is that feeling that it's kind of, yeah, it's okay, but I don't want to be doing it all the time is what's coming out from people when we talk to them. And, for those, and we asked for those that you have never worked from home, because I think about a quarter of people work from home before when we, in the survey, we did in the sample. And we said, okay, what's your interest in working from home that you haven't done it before? And it's, 60% are saying, okay, for a day or 2. Only 16 are saying, yeah, all the time. And bear in mind, this is quite an older demographic of research we were doing. I think if this was 20 to 30-year-olds, this would be even lower, the happy I've enjoyed it. And it'd be, I want to get back into the office. So that is slightly skewed by the people we're talking to. And that also makes me think about the people making these decisions about, oh, it's okay to all work from home. Those people are generally living in a house or living in the countryside, a bit older, and actually they're the ones that've had it easy. It's the people that in the 20 to 30s that are living in apartments, sharing spaces. Those are the people this is affecting. As we mentioned, Wi-Fi. I mean, I was quite impressed that over 50% of people, are happy with what they got in terms of Wi-Fi. But there are some people who did face issues to start with. They couldn't operate their systems, but that was an IT thing, which has now been sorted. But I suppose everyone's always going to want more bandwidth. So but there is the feeling actually I do want some more, especially when it's we're stress testing the system at home. This is interesting. We've been looking at multi-generational living for about 5 or 6 years. I mean, it's big in Asia, as we know. It's the part of the Chinese culture as your parents look after your children. It's big in the Mediterranean, where you want your parents back in your home to look after them, the other way around. And as we become more multicultural, that is happening in the UK. But we've only got 1.8 million households in the UK, which is only 7% of households are multi-generational houses. Yeah, we asked the question. I mean, this is slightly skewed because it's at a time when people go, oh, I want help in the home because I'm working, I'm trying to do schooling. I get that. But it was interesting is how appealing is the thought of having a space where there's 3 generations in a house. 25% of people said, yes, it's appealing. Maybe another 40%. So only 27% of people, a quarter of people rejected it, which is interesting. And there are countries like Australia, for example, which are really pushing this. They go into areas, they look at the demographics of the areas, and then they will build multi-generational households. And I don't know what the number coming out the ground is in the UK multi-generational households, but I imagine it's significantly lower than what the potential opportunity could be as well. Flexibility, I mean, every time we talk to people, flexibility of space really comes up, and we'll touch on that. And it's interesting that with COVID and lockdown and stressing the house out, I'm not surprised this has gone up even more, because how can I use different spaces for different things? And it might be a home office during the day, and it might be a little TV room at night, it might be a yoga studio later on, whatever it is. But how do we give people the chance to use flexible spaces? And then sort of last thing we came in here, this was relevant to everyone, because if you were to buy a new build home or apartment, what's important to you? And we will touch on some of these in a bit more detail. Wellbeing was number one, and this is about, you know, natural light, healthy air. And it's interesting, we've seen this rise, but when you are stress tested and you are put into somewhere 23 hours a day, which is what it was, you know, during lockdown, you really know, you know, the importance of having well-being within my home for me, my health, and my children's health is really, really important. It's something we've seen increasing, but I think this is really accelerated, which we talked about. Internet, we've talked about. Outdoor space is always going to be important for people. And energy efficiency, you know, we don't really see that up, but I mean, Helen will touch on this one later, is that because people are spending more time in their homes, the bills are getting more expensive. It's because I'm normally out 8 hours a day, but now I'm in 23 hours a day. So actually that energy efficiency is become, but also there's not just for my bills, it's also for the environment and climate, because that's obviously, we've seen a lot of that come out during COVID as well. And then finally, technology in the home. So that's kind of what we've learned. And what our view on it, what myself and Brendan have been looking at is, you know, looking at the trends and the research that we've been carrying out the last 3 or 4 years, particularly, actually, what are the impacts for moving forwards for the next normal that we live in? And, you know, my view on this is actually what COVID has done and what lockdown has done in a lot of industries is it accelerated trends. So, you know, Debenhams have been living off low interest rates and haven't changed their business model since the internet started. And it was inevitable that business was not going to last. I mean, it might sound harsh, but it's a fact. Like also a lot of, you know, some of the sort of chain restaurants, which have just haven't realized that people are now shifting towards boutique coffee places, my local place, and they haven't upped their game. So it's just accelerated what I think what have been trends already happening out there in the market. So for us, a lot of what we're seeing, there's nothing new out there, but what it has done is got people to sit up and take notice and actually go, I want to make this, I want to change. You know, as we spoke about adaptable space, this is an old one where, you know, we basically said, look, plumbing isn't wired, plumbing is fixed. Sorry, plumbing is fixed, everything else can be moved around. So how about you can move around your apartment for, you know, for different circumstances, whether you get a partner, whether you have a child. Okay, I appreciate this is a marketing person doing it, and it's probably a bit of a nightmare to do realistically, but that's appealing to, you know, 94% of people. So that's the same as where we're at now. And this is a design by a guy called Yves Bahar, who's a brand experience guy. He works and he's done a design for a company called Ori Systems, who are out in the US. And his view is, well, if you have a studio apartment, why don't you have a big living room during the day, then have a big bedroom at nighttime? Because you don't need both. And it's when you see this, you go, everyone I show this to, they go, oh, that makes so much sense. And I show it to sort of developers and house builders, and we talk about studio apartments. And what's interesting is when we first researched for a build to rent client of ours, we were looking at appealing of different types of numbers of bedrooms. I think studio was 1.8% of people wanted the studio because their perception of studio is it's just this horrible little space. We showed this to people. We said, oh, okay, if you're thinking of buying an apartment and this was 15% cheaper than a 1-bedroom apartment, what's the likelihood you buy that? And it's, you know, it's nearly 70% of people. And actually it costs 20%, it's 20% cheaper to build. And I appreciate there are planning restrictions and stuff like that, but it's just interesting when you look at things from a different lens, how people then, what their take on it is.
I mean, I think just to pick up on some of James's points here, the flexibility thing is really obviously very, very important. And build to rent, I think, particularly around build to rent with its amenity play, is already stolen a march on the rest of residential real estate, because it has already a need to incorporate some aspects of working from home or some sort of social amenity within the buildings themselves. So we have a sense that this is to be included. But if we break that down a little bit and we say, well, we'll need some home working both in our apartments as perhaps potentially in shared amenity spaces. But we start to now rub up against some of the tensions that may be beyond the buildings themselves and the planning system and that type of thing. So typically in build to rent, we would major more on 2-bed 4s to take advantage of the sharing economy. If we look at what's required for an office space, the standard practice would suggest that a standard desk in an office is between 6 and 8 square meters. Do we need that much space in the home? Probably not. So how much space do we need in the home? Does this mean we do more 2-bed 3s, but then even a single bedroom at 10 square meters, the national space standards is probably a little large. So is there a sort of a half a room? And where does that half room go? Because under the well-being agenda, we would like that to be near a window. So the sort of technology that you've seen really potentially is a great enabler. And because Build to Rent has a central management system, we can argue that those sorts of technologies will be maintained and will be looked after. And when we take that narrative to the planners, who are typically very opposed to studios, we may well win that argument. So I think studios are attractive in the build to rent space that certainly can have viability. They're not attractive in the planning environment, but I think the build to rent sector, perhaps the UKAA, could take on some advocacy where in specific and in controlled circumstances, we could see some flexibility around space standards and how we deploy things like studios with the right technology that will be maintained over time.
A sort of link to that is this feeling of options. You know, we talk to people about, you know, this is like amenities and facilities, and obviously this is as relevant to build to rent as any other category. And how important is it having options within your own apartment, even if I'm renting or if I'm buying it? And not surprisingly, you know, it's sort of 85% of people want, you know, I want options. And, you know, I find it phenomenal that if I'm purchasing an apartment, I don't get an option. Whereas I go and buying a £10,000 car, I can get 30 options. And I find it very difficult to comprehend that. And, you know, I look at what BMW are doing. They're already looking ahead. They're called the BMW 100 project, Next 100. I really recommend you go and see it, look at it. And they've got 3 categories. They've got the Bentley, they've got the 7 Series, they've got the Mini. And they said, well, no one's going to own a Mini. You'll have an app on your phone and you'll press come to me and it'll come to you, but it'll be fully personalized. Even if you don't own this car, it will play your music, it will change color to your favorite color, it will recognize who you are. When you leave the Mini, the next person comes, it will recognize that person. So this is what other categories are looking at in terms of personalization. So what are we doing and how are we going to do it with our industry? And I think it's a thing that we shouldn't just sit there and wait for it to happen, because it is going to happen.
And I think you're right, James, from a rental perspective, creating those options for residents is about that kind of creative design and use of space. So we are certainly seeing more and more residents talking about having a dedicated office space, but one that they can then either physically close the door on or put away in some way at the end of the day, be that with sliding cupboard doors or something very funky like your electronic walls. I think from a communal space as well, the expectation is changing. So we've all talked in Build to Rent for quite a long time now, that mantra of flexible amenity space that essentially is a very, very flexible resident-led space that can be used for a huge variety of different uses. I think now people are asking for amenity space that is really clever and that either through design or through furniture provision can be used for those communal activities, but can also be used for small groups, and then can importantly be used by an individual as an extension of their home space. So, and that space being a space that they can really control, be it a working booth or partition seating. So I think that demand for control of space is becoming far greater.
Technology on the home is one thing we're always tracking. This is an old one, and this is some old research we're showing now. So it correlates exactly with the same that we've in the lockdown research. But what is interesting is you talked about technology in the home, or use IoT, Internet of Things, and people talk about, oh, I want my fridge to tell me that my milk's running out. And you go, well, actually, it's not that. That's not really made much difference to your life. What matters to people, and this is particularly due to our Build to Rent, which people will have looked at, is not only is the safety of the outside the building, the safety of my apartment, you know, that's how technology, and the safety of the area, obviously. So safety can, you know, technology can really help with safety with people. It can make me save money, you know, in terms of making me more efficient. It gives me more control over my home, and it makes it more convenience and peace of mind. But that's what people think about when they think about technology in the home and how it can help make my living experience better, safer, and I can control it more. Okay, fair enough. I appreciate this is for this was research we did for people buying, not renting, but it's exactly that. I don't see there being any difference in the theory behind it. We said to people, okay, if there was a £250,000 apartment, and it was, you know, it was IoT, so Internet of Things in there, had everything you wanted in there, what extra would you pay for it? And it was sort of 9% different. It was 270,000. And I bring this up because I talk to people in the sales area, and it's, oh, we're not going to put a Nest system in. And it's like, excuse me, it's £300. And they have these conversations with people. You go, but actually people will pay more for it. And people will rent that. We will rent your apartment over someone else's. And when they're in your apartment, they'll stay renting it for longer because it's more convenient, it's safer, and it's cheaper to be in that apartment. So technology has a big part to play. And it's almost, I think now, if you're anyone designing homes without IoT, you're making that home redundant. So not only is it the right thing to do for the customer, I think it absolutely is the right thing to do for your business as well.
And I think that absolutely ties into the rental market, probably in the rental market, rather than it being about generating additional rental levels, it's about running the management efficiently and giving customers what they want. So increasingly, customers want access 24/7. They only want to speak to somebody if that's what they want to do. It doesn't have to be something that's a demand. So providing a customer portal like the one you can see here, which is pretty much becoming a given now, I think, in terms of resident expectation, allows residents to access their arrears, make payments, tenancy documents, etc., on a portal online. And that can drive efficiencies in terms of the management operation for those properties. But I think it's also important to think about the slightly sexier, more exciting stuff. So like you touched on, James, we are working with our parent company, Places for People, on things like Alexa technology. So customers, and apologies if I set this off in anyone's home, can say, Alexa, please show me my tenancy document, or when does my tenancy document end? And Alexa should be able to provide that information. Clearly, there are some privacy concerns, and not all customers want to do that or want us to know when the milk in their fridge is running out. But I think there are some really simple bits of IoT that can really help from a welfare perspective, particularly when I think of some of our more elderly residents. So, for example, in a retirement village, if we know that Mrs. Smith normally turns on her light and puts the kettle on by 10 a.m. and we have sensor triggers in those bits of equipment that show that she hasn't done that and it's 12 noon, our team can very easily and unobtrusively make a welfare call just to check that she's okay. So it's really well rounded, and there are lots of opportunities here that we can deliver through tech.
Wellbeing. So we mentioned this because when we talked previously in the lockdown research, this is from outside of that research, and yet again it's showing how important people find wellbeing in the home is. And I ran some groups for a build to rent client of ours, and we talked about wellbeing in the home, and we did 4 different groups of people across a range of it's 25 to 55, and almost every single one of them said, well, surely they shouldn't be doing that anyway, surely they should have to do that. They didn't realize that actually there were these standards, like the Wellbeing Institute standard. And then when you talk to people, we do specific wellbeing research, and we look at a load of products, which we can take that offline, and we understand what people like about those products. But this is looking at the various elements of wellbeing that we research, and they're all pretty high. There's nothing lacking here. But from my bedroom to low emissions heating, I want, I'm worried about my carbon footprint, which is interesting. It's a lot of people think, oh, it's just, it's other corporates. I've got to have, we've got to get zero carbon. But actually, look, the consumers want their own one as well. How do you future-proof homes? Access to light, obvious one. We all appreciate that. That's getting big as well. Quality of water. So, all these things are important to people. There's not one, okay, there's plants and landscape, which is coming lower. But it's still 75% of people find it appealing. They're all very important to people. And then the same thing again, we said to people, okay, if you're looking to rent or buy a house, what impact will this have on you? And it's 80% of people said it have an impact on us. And in those groups we did for our build to rent clients, we looked at pricing, how much extra would you pay for it, and that was a harder one to get to. But no surprise that said that there's so much build to rent coming out the ground. So okay, if one is wellbeing and one isn't, is that 99% I would rent the one which is a wellbeing apartment. But more importantly, I would probably stay there for longer, because actually I think it's better for me, my health, and my family. So it'd be a real drive for creating a sticky client, be having a wellbeing apartment. And the same thing in terms of the buying market. We did this, and you put up the internet, the smart technology home was 270,000. The wellbeing home was 272,000. And actually, you know what? I'm a marketing consumer guy, so I could be a bit not glib, but there is obviously work needs to be done. It's the right filters, looking at lighting, but it's not. If you're building a lot of stuff, this is easy to get back this money for people. But it's also, I think that the way I look at it as well is actually for your own business. It's a great story for your own business that we're actually driving a well-being home for people. We want people to feel healthy in the home and feel good about living in the home, and therefore this is the type of homes that we want to deliver. So it's good for you, it's good for your staff, make them feel good about it as well, and it's obviously there are PR benefits off the back of it as well.
And
Can I just
go ahead, Brendan.
No, you go ahead, Helen.
Okay, so we couldn't talk about well-being without talking about community. You know, most of us here are build to rent aficionados, and it's a real point of pride, I think, in terms of something that a build to rent development can provide over kind of typical disparate PRS. Community, you know, we are the only country in the world that has a Minister for Loneliness, which I think says something about our national psyche. And that formation of community within a build to rent development, and, you know, not forced fun, not Club 18 to 30, but bringing people with similar interests together and giving them space to do that and facilitating it, be it a cycling club or a book group or a homework club. You know, I think that helps people feel secure. We know that renting, and in particular the insecurity of a rental tenure, can have a negative impact on mental health. And if we can give secure tenure, as many build to rent buildings now do, an active community, a well-designed building, I think that will have a significant impact on people's well-being.
And I think just to build on that point, I think what's really important here is to recognize that whilst there is a design and specification role, there's an operating role, and there's an individual role to achieve a good well-being result or solution. I mean, we typically use a 99-point assessment methodology, which is linked to the NHS and a range of clinical trials. And the thing that comes up as the most important well-being criteria is having good neighbours and good neighbourliness and interaction between them, which is the community play, followed then by natural light, good interior design, access to green spaces, and a good amount of storage. So there's a mix of practical things in here and emotive things, and we need to recognize that the development brief have to include all of these elements to be successful.
Yeah, I think community as a whole is you know, outside of just the place the building we live in, has really come to the fore, because, you know, you go to your local butchers, local fishmongers, those people now have never been so busy, and, you know, people are actually enjoying seeing up. There's been, you know, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups on streets, all this stuff has started happening a lot more. I think people realize that importance of community has really come to the fore, you know, helping get shopping for people on the street or neighbors, and it's just connecting us more all the time. Sort of big one for me, I suppose, because I've just sent my daughter to a forest school, is this one as well, is that, you know, you think 30 years ago we had a sort of rubbish small TV. That's it, screen. That's the only screen we had in our lives. Now they're in our pockets, in our cars, on our cookers, bigger, you know, huge TVs. We're looking at a screen every day, and we are, you know, I think there's been it's interesting. We look at other industries like the holiday, you know, luxury holiday industry, for example, and it's about wilderness. We're going to take you to the middle of nowhere where you can't use the phone, and that's fantastic. That's appealing, and there's people wanting to reconnect with nature. We are an urban species for the first time. You know, since 1960s, we became an urban species. So, you know, it's interesting, in lockdown, there was, you know, people living in towns talked about, oh, I heard the birds. You know, I saw no planes in the sky. And when garden centres reopened, it was big news. And there was queues at garden centres, whether it's getting stuff from my apartment or whether it's getting stuff from my garden. So in that space, that feeling of nature and connecting to nature is really, really important.
I mean, I think that biophilia design, which is often, you know, very much about access to the natural world and a re-establishment of that connection with nature and the ecosystems in which we live. But biophilic design is not just about greening a building. It's also about the sequence of spaces, that having spaces which have an organic logic to them that we can understand. It can also be trying to provoke awe or even fear. You get sort of if we go up to high spaces. And it links very, very closely with the well-being agenda. So again, these things are not silos, and breaking the silo mentality is really important. That, you know, biophilic design, well-being, and indeed the carbon crisis that we face are all very much interlinked, and they don't need to be extravagant. They can be very, very modest solutions. So this is a scheme that we've done recently. It's a residential scheme, and we've integrated biophilic design with a degree of social design, some sort of well-being elements. So there's social corridors, where corridors are a place to meet and dwell for a short time, with windows into the corridors so that you can see if someone's at home, and that there's a sense of the presence of life, that sort of wider ecosystems, communal spaces so that people can come together, and outdoor spaces which will have lots of greenery in them on the one hand, and on this one there's 2 terraces. One has an urban agriculture, a chance for some sort of allotment activity, as well as just some outdoor space. So we're already working with these things, but perhaps we're not always coordinating them as effectively as we could. Some of these solutions are already at our fingertips and need only be quite modest to have quite a high impact.
The active abode is been something that's been slowly on the rise, but this is one of those ones which has hugely accelerated during the pandemic. There's 20% of people watching more online videos in the US than ever before. But there's also mental wellness as well as physical wellness. The likes of Peloton saw a 62% increase in sales, and this is a subscription model, so they've got you tied in, ad infinitum. There's been Instagram classes have taken off significantly. Even looking at the obvious one is Joe Wicks. Someone's going, what a great guy Joe Wicks, did a good job. He did, but he's made £10 million out of it. So he's not complaining. He gets £10,000 per Instagram post, and he's getting £7,500 of sponsorship for YouTube. So that's the kind of people making a lot of money out of this as well. And but we're not saying, which Hannah's going about, it's not, the gym isn't dead, but it's just another way you can use your home.
And I think that's what's been really interesting for us, James. Like many build-to-rent providers, gyms are critical in terms that we're ensuring that value proposition for customers and prospective customers. We had to shut them along with everyone else during the pandemic, and we provided, like you've just gone through, some in-room, in-home exercise options for residents as a bit of an alternative, which went down very well. So we were surprised that, from the minute we reopened the gym, albeit with increased social distancing measures and booking and making it, realistically slightly more difficult for people to use that gym, they have been extremely keen to get back very quickly. And for me, I think that ties in with the community and the community creation, that we know that people enjoy working out in gyms with other people, be that on a piece of exercise equipment or as part of a class or a yoga class. That community experience is really very positive for the residents.
And our homes, they've changed. We used to sleep in them, eat in them, and watch some TV in them. And there's always been this thing about, live and play. Then it's come to live, work, play. But it's kind of live, work, play, get fit, shop, whatever it is. So you can do anything in your home, and that's brought by adaptable spaces, brought by technology. A whole, you can have a 3D printer in your back garden, become a manufacturer. So there's, the way that we use our homes, I think, has changed a lot. And therefore, and part of this is, we're spending a lot more time in them. So therefore, it's really important that those spaces are adaptable. But there is an issue, is the more time you spend at home, the more it costs to live at home as well, in terms of your bills and stuff. So that's definitely a change which we've seen as a result of this as well. And obviously, there's spaces in the way we use spaces. This is Matabar, and it's quite interesting what they're doing. They're looking at they're looking at brand design of offices. So you've got like an office workspace at home, which it's a modular office setup, which can then come down, but it gives you that feeling of working in a proper environment. So you can do different things within your house.
And this is, for me, the most interesting bit, because we're already starting to see kind of what the research is telling us in real life. So we're currently leasing our piece for Sweetwater on the old Olympic Park. And, customers are, where they can, renting 2 beds where they would typically have had 1, so they can have that separate space. The demand for external space has always been important, but now we are seeing residents very much wanting private external space as opposed to shared, or even if that private space is very small, just a balcony, they want to have some level of that external space they can control. I think the other bit that's interesting that we're perhaps not seeing quite yet is the impact it will have on investment models and life cycle costs. previously we spent maybe 10% of our waking hours at home. I think for a lot of people that will now be in the 50, 60, 70% range, particularly with working from home, which is inevitably going to cause more wear and tear on furniture, floor coverings, etc. So from a build to rent perspective and life cycle modelling costs, I think that's really interesting, because we are going to have to start to account for more replacement. And I think Brendan's going to touch a little bit more on energy efficiencies, but we are certainly starting to see residents being more aware of that. They are conscious that their bills are higher, and anything that is involved in the design that makes that better is certainly a massive pull for them.
Indeed. I mean, I think the carbon challenge that we face, and indeed sort of energy efficiency and the cost of running the home, are all really underpinned by the Paris Agreement, which is a profoundly positive agreement for the world, but it commits us to some pretty heavy duty outcomes. The first of which is 50% a reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2050. The reduction of 50% is considered the easier of the two. And where this is going to impact, and we only have 10 short years, or slightly less than 10 short years, to get to that first 50%. And this is going to have an impact on how we live and how we design buildings and how we operate those buildings enormously. And again, build to rent, because it's a long income model, is incredibly well placed to ask those searching questions about how do I design now for an optimal solution in 10 years time, in 20 years time, and so on and so forth. And we need to start asking these questions of ourselves and of the projects that we bring forward. In terms of technology, of course, technology is going to be a major part in providing the solution, whether it be from thermal efficiency of the building itself to the way that it's ventilated, and of course the amount of energy and it takes to run these things. But there will be lifestyle changes too. We will have to wear additional jumpers in the winter time rather than just turning on the heater. We will need to think differently about how we consume. I think the impact on the impact of the Paris agreements on consumer culture is going to be profound, in as much as that some things will not be as readily available as perhaps they have been, when we look at the issue of the distances some consumer goods have to travel. So there's a huge amount of change is going to be forced upon us through signing this up and making a commitment to try and stabilize the carbon agenda and move towards a brighter future. And it will affect both the residents as well as the designers and the buildings that we build, and indeed the way that they are operated, and indeed the cost of bringing those products forward. It's a difficult area. There are many solutions out there, but we need to create a more active and lively debate about what are the appropriate solutions now, and where might we be in 10 years' time.
As we talked about before, that multi-generational homes have been trending for several years now, and I think this is really I think the pandemic has brought this to the front of people's minds, because not only two things. One is help, especially with my children at home and the holidays and working the school, but also actually I want them closer. I don't want them in a care home because I worry about them. I want them to be close to me. So there's a selfish driver and there's a caring driver, and both of them are playing to actually, if we've got our separate spaces within the home, we've got our separate entrances, we've got our shared spaces, and it just makes life a lot easier. And there are other things as well, the cost of property, financial benefits. There are the rational sides of it as well.
Okay, so on the intergenerational living sort of platform or ideas, this is the scheme we did about five years ago now, I think 5 or 6 years ago, which was designed with just exactly in mind. So basically it's 6 modules of houses. It was fully MMC, off-site construction, and they could convert from being a 6-bedroom house as one module to a 3-bedroom to 3 flats, or a duplex and a flat. And what that allowed is larger families to move in, and the idea would be that as your children left home, you would retire to the ground floor, and the upper floors could either be rented out or used differently. But indeed, it allows it was our first intergenerational project, and it just is it is a solution that allows for a very flexible family living agenda, whether it be with the wider family and children staying at home for longer, or indeed the intergenerational piece. And certainly it's there to be seen up in Crystal Palace.
This is one which, this is probably of all the 10 trends, I'd say this is one which has, come out very much as of COVID. It's there in part, which Helen will probably know more than me, but actually all of a sudden now, especially within, the build to rent area, when you are sharing, and it's community and it's sharing, it's hygiene now. There's a prerequisite for this, and this isn't just starting out. I was talking to Connor Lifts, and they're talking about now how we've got new lifts where you don't put your finger on it, and you talk to it, use voice activation. Just how can we do this as well? This has been done in India by Valentino Gareri, and this is a school we're looking at. It's a sustainable modular school, which is being an educational centre, I should put actually in it. It sort of blends what they've done. They've blended outdoor, indoor living. They've got, and then they've looked at health concerns from COVID. So they've got sort of easy distancing, wider corridors. They've even got repurposed spaces, beds in for the sick. We can do that as well. Through just simple things, like touch, we can't touch things. So FSB in Germany have got this hands-free handle, and this is a picture of it in hospital. But this could easily be in one of your apartment blocks, moving from one space to the next.
I think reflecting on the pandemic, hygiene and the attitude to hygiene was the thing that starkly changed overnight. So clearly it's always been important, but it was something that we probably only really talked about when it went wrong and something hadn't been cleaned and you could see that it was dirty. Actually, overnight, that changed to residents having a really proactive concern in terms of the hygiene. And it became quite an emotive personal issue because clearly there are serious health risks and concerns that people had. So it became very important that we had a system in terms of managing the hygiene within the building, things like one-way walking and one family in the lift and all that kind of thing. But more importantly, that we could communicate those systems and really give people reassurance that the homes they were living in were safe from a hygiene perspective.
Finally, which is, I've spent quite a lot of my working life helping businesses position themselves, where it's visioning and missioning and selling your values and bringing your values to life in your organisation. And, for me, I'm quite happy in a way that businesses are being held to higher standards now. And this is particularly look at the millennials and Gen Z. I grew up watching Wall Street and thinking greed was good, which is not the case. This is very different. It's not Goldman Sachs and those banks are not the aspiration people to work for. You talk to millennials and Gen Z, it's about what do the companies stand for. And actually that is more important to me than the salary, and those socially conscious values are becoming more and more important. And it's interesting when you look at how brands respond. I mean, you look at how leaders respond in a crisis, and everyone judges that leader. So that we will not talk about Trump, but that's what happens. It's the same with companies. So how you respond in the crisis. Are you furloughing all your staff and still making lots of money? Well, it's not good. Lots of companies gave the money back because they realised actually it was the right thing to do. So having a purpose for your business. And making sure you live and breathe that purpose, and it rolls through your employees first, then your partners, your suppliers, and everything you do in terms of your communication. That then becomes important. So for me, it's when we talk to sort of build to rent companies or property companies, that we're starting at actually why are you here? What are you here to do? And don't tell me it's build homes, rent homes, because that's not enough. It's actually what are you going to do? Look at some examples of companies who've done it, which I quite like within the sort of property space. This is Hyundai in South Korea. This market, I think it was down to about 3 years ago, they had sort of 200 visitors a day. What they've done, they completely take over the market. They put this now 4,500 visitors a day. They put in 20 entrepreneurial business in there for free. And it's just regenerated the whole area. And this is a cost to them, but actually they're getting a lot of brand rewards for that. Amazon, we think, is the big bad retailer, but they're actually doing a lot of good as well. And the nice thing about this is they don't promote this, which is also important. This is in their head office in Seattle. They've got 63,000 square feet, which they use as a shelter. And normally it has about 1,000 families a year go through it. They can have 200 families a year at any one time in there, 200 people at any one time. The moment during the pandemic, they've got 50 people in there. 50 families in there because they can distance. But actually, it's just looking at, what's important to you as a business and how can you bring that to life, whether it's within your remit in terms of your apartments you have. Are we about better living or about happy living or whatever it is? But also, what can we do outside of that? Because we work in property, and there are some big issues which are closely connected to us, which environment is one, which Brendan's talked about, the impact that we have on the environment. Then there's housing as well. So what can you do as an organization? And I think that will make you much more of an aspirational brand as well. You know, probably one of the best examples is, you know, Patagonia were a business just starting out selling crampons and stuff for people, but actually they believe they can change the world. They believe they can make it a greener world and make our planet better. And that's what they do, and that's what they do every day. And that's why people wear Patagonia because of this, not because of the quality of the down jacket. People work for Patagonia because of this. That's why they do it. And that's what these companies do. And I think within property, I find it harder to think of companies within the property space that do this well or do it for the right reasons. So I think there's a big opportunity there, because then people will want to have one of your apartments, not just because it's energy efficient and it's nicely designed, but also you do good for the world. And I think sometimes you forget about that, especially in build to rent, where a lot of the audience we're talking to are millennials and Gen Z people, that they have, you know, their social conscious is really important to them. And how do you do that? You know, the simple things, there are simple ways of doing it. It's easy to put up Dell and Apple, because I know it's easy to do that. But what it's about is, you know, when we talked about people, companies about what their visions are, it's about what's your why, what's your reason for being. And most companies think about, what do we do? Or we have apartments, we rent them out, how X, Y, and Z. Dell, what do we do is, we're going to have computers which we will adapt to what people want. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is, we'll wait till they've ordered them, then we'll build it, and then we'll ship it to them. So you can have a different color screen, different color casings. Why? To make profit. Apple is completely the way. Apple was all about technology will change the world. And that's what Steve Jobs believed in from the get-go. And his view is, well, how are you going to do that then? They go, well, we'll make the technology intuitive, and we'll make the design beautiful. What are you going to create then? What does it matter? Laptop, phones, you know, TVs, anything. People buy it because they buy into what what he's about. And you know, in categories outside of property, when, you know, my old hat on, you know, this is a really important one. It's cars, anything out there. It's actually, they buy why you do it, not what you do. People don't know what is inside an Apple computer, but they buy what Apple was about. And then, you know, what we talked about at the start of this presentation about brand, it's what to consume, you know, in like is customer is direct. Outside the build doesn't talk about the car, but you have to be customer centric. But being customer centric and understand the consumer insights, understand them using data to analyze how they're using their different spaces is really key. But also you need to look to the future. You know, Henry Ford said, if I'd ask people what they wanted, they'll ask for a faster horse. So people won't give you the answers. You've got to look at the major trends facing society, whether it's nature, things we talk about today, you know, single households, nature, technology, obvious things like that. How can you then adapt your design and adapt your service and adapt your offering to make sure you are future-proofing your product as much as possible? We can't all do it, because you can't design the apartment in the future. We don't know what it's going to be, but we can actually put things in place, make it more flexible, for example, where people can then make it more adaptable. Therefore, it will be more future-proofed. And this is Brendan's favorite quote, and I couldn't agree more, is that, you know, people are happy, they pay more for stuff. They live in there for longer. They'll buy, you know, work in the car. You made your customers as happy as possible, because you knew Volkswagen would go from a Golf to a Passat to whatever it is. They stay within it because they're happy with that brand. And not only do they pay more, they'll live in your apartment for longer. They'll buy more services from you. I know it could be very glib, but I think it's just a nice way to end this, is that actually, if we have happy residents, you know, they're going to enjoy living there. They will pay more. They will live there for longer. And you know, you as a business, you might think at the start, gosh, why have we put some of those things in the design phase or the build phase? Is it worth it? Down the end of the track, it will always be worth it, because your customers will reward you for that.
Okay, James, Brendan, Helen, thank you so much. Look, there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of really good stuff. We've got 5 minutes for any questions that come in. Anyone wants to pose them, but I'll start off by just asking, what seems to me probably a key question. I mean, you touched, James, a lot on what people said they would do, what their attitudes were when we asked them, what would you buy? And I buy Brendan's piece always, that they're happy people buy more stuff. But where is the evidence of this? Where can we see this? I mean, Helen talked a lot of anecdotal stuff, but where are the numbers that are going to feed back into the spreadsheet?
Well, from my point of view, we've put some now already about what we do 2 lots of research every year, for example, where we look at the latest technology in those wellbeing products. And whether it's energy efficient shower to whatever it is, we ask people, what extra do you pay for that product? So we know, and then even into those, we looked at an IoT home and apartments, or we looked at a wellbeing apartment, £250,000 base price. What would you pay for it? They'll pay £270,000 for it. Admittedly, that's on research of 500 people, but all the data we look at supports that people will do that. They will pay more, and even if they don't pay more, the other way of looking at it is: are they going to rent your apartment versus someone else's? Will they stay in your apartment for longer? And in your gut feel what the answer is, and there is some data out there. But obviously, if we have any company wants to commission that to go in more detail, which I understand, we can do that. But everything I've seen, it leads that way. I don't know what you think, Helen.
I agree. I mean, I think some of the stats that we see, and Dave, you'll be familiar with in build to rent as opposed to a typical PRS portfolio, are better collection of arrears, and certainly in times like the pandemic, because we are seeing that kind of happier customer, more prepared to pay aspect. So we're certainly seeing it reflect, and we probably don't have the graphs and charts you'd like, Dave.
I always ask for them. No, I think the key for me is I absolutely buy the input and I buy the output. It's the mechanisms in between, and James and Brendan, you've touched on some of them. These are the levers we can pull. It's actually going, let's construct some way of really pushing that into design. But we've got a couple of minutes left, but just before we go, we've got one question in from Anna McDonald asking, do you think there'll be any other specific changes to later living? And I don't know who wants to pick that up. And Helen, you're nodding. Brendan, you're looking sage.
And I can touch briefly. We're in the middle of trying to both rent and sell a retirement village in Stow-on-the-Wold in the Cotswolds, which is beautiful if anyone's looking. And actually, we've seen a huge uptick in interest. Clearly, during COVID, inquiries were very down because I don't think people wanted to leave their houses to go and look around. But post-COVID, we have seen a massive upturn in interest, particularly from sons and daughters for their parents who have found real comfort in the fact that their parents can live in an environment where there is an on-site team, where there is provision for cleaning and food provision, etc. So there's certainly been an uptick in terms of interest. And then some really small things like where typically we would operate on-site restaurants, the provision of in-home dining and the food delivery has become far more popular. So I think there's a lot of change happening there. It's an interesting space from a tech perspective because typically residents won't be as tech savvy and won't be as prepared to use apps and iPads, etc. And I think it's a really good example of a space where we have to use technology to enable interaction rather than replace it. But yeah, certainly a good space to watch, I think, in terms of change.
Thank you, Helen.
I think from an architectural perspective, if I just make a small comment, I mean, I think technology is going to play a very strong role here, but so too will some of the layouts. And we certainly have been looking at different layout options and how we can keep the home ecosystem alive if one or other is incapacitated, or how do we allow more healthcare to be delivered in the home. Those are the sorts of things that I think that we will see going forward.
James, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is Helen's point of view that technology for me, I think the biggest advantage for IoT, so the biggest life change is for the aging people. Voice activation can do incredible things. Turn off the lights, lock the door, turn off the TV. It can make living so much better and so much easier. Whether it's even from fall detection flooring to a simple plug, which we can tell which rooms are spending time in. So I think, back to my earlier comment that fridge telling me my milk's running out isn't really going to change my life, but actually I think with later living, it can make a huge difference.
Okay, and I think on that point, it's now 10:59, so I think I probably ought to wrap up now. But I'd like to start off by just saying thank you to James, thank you to Brendan, thank you to Helen for an absolutely fascinating session. if you want to hear more, then Brendan and Fred James are doing a session at the UKAA Festival of Rent called The Future Home. And they better get on and do lots of work on that, because we're looking forward to some really nice, interesting research on that piece. And it's a session I'm looking forward to. A lot of the topics that we've touched on, health and well-being, fitness, design, brand, will also be covered at the festival. And for those of you who haven't bought your tickets yet, we've still got our early bird offer until the end of this week. So anyway, look, I say thanks again to everybody, and thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope everybody found that interesting as I did. Just a reminder that we have a couple more sessions coming up. Tomorrow we're launching with the BPF and CREFSA Europe, the BTR Hub, which will be a one-stop shop for every piece of information that our three organisations and others know about build to rent. So a single place for people to go to find out more. And then we saw a little thing from Amazon, James put up on the screen. We have a session from SmartRent, who are invested in by Amazon, called on the 22nd, called "The Only Thing Your Tech Stack Is Missing Is the Real Estate." So I think, again, a topic that we've perhaps touched on today. But okay, and I'd just like to say again, thank you. The recording will be available tomorrow if you want to look at it. Thank you, and join us for some more webinars shortly. But again, thank you once again, James, Brendan and Helen, and cheerio.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.